The Candid Frame is supported by donations by listeners just like you. Help us to bring you great conversations with great photographers. Support the show today with your monthly contribution through our Patreon effort at patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or click on the link in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. Thank you.
This is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame. Photography often provides an opportunity for reinvention. Though many have discovered photography at a young age and began early photographic careers, others have found their way to a photographic life a little later. Though we often hear about people who are dissatisfied with their initial careers and turn to photography for a more creative and fulfilling outlet, it's usually not the unhappiness itself that spurs the change. It can be the result of a job loss or a dramatic life experience. But there are some people, like today's guest, who make a conscious choice to change their lives so that they are working behind the camera. Dotan Saguy has achieved success as a high-tech entrepreneur, but he knew that photography for him was a calling. So he designed and structured his last venture to give him the flexibility to dedicate time to his photography, which includes street photography and documentary work for nonprofits. As we have learned so many times before on this show, there is no one way to leading a photographic life. It's really about finally making the choice to do so. Well, Dotan, welcome to The Candid Frame. It's a pleasure to have you.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be there. It's an honor.
I know you were shooting for a long time before you transitioned from your previous career. How were you introduced to photography?
Well, my dad was a photographer. Well, he wasn't a professional photographer, but the camera was always around. So as a kid, I was just familiar with, with the camera around. The real introduction was for my wedding present. I got married really young. I got married around 23 years old, and for my wedding present, basically gathered all the money from my friends and my friends had given me, and bought a Nikon at B&H or some New York shop back then. And so just started, taking some photos for vacation and things like that. So that was really the first time. But I didn't get serious with it till very recently. So even though I've been shooting for about 20 plus years now, but you could say 95% of that was really just kind of, doing, vacation photos and kids photos and things like that.
And what was your career before you finally threw your head into doing photography as much as you do now?
My career was in technology. So I was trained as a software engineer, moved from there to more project management of technology projects. I lived through the whole internet boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. And I was an entrepreneur several times over with different types of businesses, between e-commerce and then going into mobile, the whole mobile boom. And still now I have a mobile app company that I manage on the side, but it's taking very little time.
I'm going to ask you this, and I have talked to so many people who have gotten into photography, but whose careers revolved around technology, who are like sort of IT guys or something like that. And I've heard that so much. And for you, why do you think photography was such a lure, isn't a lure for people who are in that field? I know you don't have a comprehensive understanding of everyone who's picked up photography who's in your career field, but I'm kind of curious as to what you think.
I think there might be something there in terms of people in technology are always interested in gadgets and things like that, and I think photography. There's the gas syndrome, that, like we call it, the gear acquisition syndrome. So I think a lot of photographers, a lot of technology people love just experimenting with new gear and buying the latest camera and count the pixels and all of that. I would say for me it's a little bit different, even though I am a gadget guy and I like to be on the forefront of technology. And I followed the whole transition from film to digital very closely. I think I always had a a design background that I wasn't really able to fully express in my career, but I was always interested in. As a kid, I was drawing and I won some drawing contests, and so it was always something I did on the side, the whole design thing. And when the web happened, I actually started applying some of that by helping the design and figuring out the design for applications, which at the time were desktop applications. And I think I always try to apply this throughout. Photography for me was just another way to draw. So when I finally had more time, because it was really the lack of time that was kind of holding me back from doing more photography and really dedicating myself to it. So when I started having enough time, when my business is starting to kind of fade into the background in terms of priorities and time that I had to dedicate to them, I really started devoting my time to photography, and that's what really led me to my current way that I'm spending my time, which is mostly in photography now.
So was it a conscious choice to?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I designed the last business that I set up. I designed it so that I could eventually kind of spend less and less time managing it and basically give other people, empower other people to run the business or run different sides, different aspects of the business better than I could. So I was able to extract myself for the most part, and I designed it that way so that I could spend more time with photography.
Why was that important to you? Because a lot of people, when they create a successful business and they're earning a nice income and they have a nice lifestyle, usually go on to pursue creating another business to earn more money, to create more sort of success in terms of the way most people look at it. Why move away from that and do something along the lines of photography?
Well, I had a couple of life events that I guess made me think really hard about what I wanted to do with my life. One was my father passing away at an early age, about over 10 years ago now, and realizing that I didn't know how much time I had. When you're in your 20s, it feels like you've got, several lifetimes ahead of you, and there's, an unlimited amount of time, so you always have time to do whatever you want. When you're in your 30s, you're still in that mode, and some people don't really realize that their time is limited till they get like way into their 60s or 70s. In my case, it happened in my late 30s with my dad passing away. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing is I had a very traumatic ski accident about 5 years ago where I almost died. I was basically falling off the side of a cliff, and I pretty much felt like I was dying as I was coming down the slope out of control and without my skis, and so seeing some boulders at the bottom that I was going to hit. So between these two things, that kind of really reminded me about how impermanent things are, and I guess how you want to think hard about what you really want to do with your time. That's really what turned me on to photography in a big way, and that's when I decided it wasn't more money that I needed in my life or more validation about my technology skills, but what would make me happiest was to express myself more as an artist and as a photographer.
I've read on occasion where people who've had those near-death experiences have that sort of revelation where where they think, God, I really need to change my life in some sort of dramatic way. It may not be a career, but it may be something else. Mm-hmm. But that many of them sort of slowly slip back into their old patterns of living and thinking.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What do you think allowed you to sort of maintain your focus to actually do those things? Because it's not easy. I mean, I know that you had some advantages in terms of the fact that you had created this business, but there can still be moments where it's kind of like, well, maybe I should just stick to what I've been doing.
I was ready to move on. I had started several other companies before. I think I was the one before this one, before the mobile company. I was a little bit burnt out in terms of the whole fundraising and managing lots of people and all the responsibilities that came with it, and feeling kind of trapped. Once the business became successful and through the ups and downs and, all the responsibilities that weigh on your shoulders. And so after that, I was really ready to move on to something where I was going to be more independent. And at the time, I wasn't really seeing as far as photography. I was just hoping to set up a business where I would be independent didn't need to maybe work as hard and have more time to reflect on what I really wanted to do. So it kind of came progressively, but I was already in my head. I was already past the, seeking the entrepreneurial, like becoming the new Google or anything like that. I was really already determined to prioritize my lifestyle and my time and personal time over, making more money or building a bigger company kind of thing.
And one of the advantages that provided you is that you didn't have to deal with the pressure of trying to make a living as a photographer. It just provided you the freedom to be able to just practice the kind of photography that you wanted to practice.
Right, exactly. That was absolutely key. So, yeah, it was. I had the luxury of being able to do that. It's not obvious for everyone to do this. I know a lot of photographers who are very, very talented, but they're somewhat held back by the fact that they have to make a living from their photography, and as such they have to do weddings and other things that they don't necessarily. I mean, there's very interesting wedding photos, but it doesn't necessarily go into their art portfolio or their street portfolio that they really want to build. So I had the luxury to really be able to only focus on personal projects, which I realize is not given to everyone. So I'm very I feel very lucky to be able to proceed that way.
You practice a good amount of street photography in your work, but you just mentioned personal projects. Can you give me an example of one of those early ones that was pivotal for you?
Yeah, so I really didn't start doing personal projects per se till fairly late into this new era of my photography. So the personal project that I've been probably dedicating the most time, or that I started first, was this Venice Beach project, which started about a year and a half ago. And so I just decided if I was going to shoot street, I was shooting street all over LA or Paris or wherever I was, and I got a lot of interesting shots, but when I looked at it as a portfolio, it didn't quite gel together the way I wanted. So that's when I realized, hey, I seem to enjoy shooting in Venice more because I have maybe more successful shots there, and I enjoy the process of shooting there, and I like what I get there. So why not focus more on that part of LA? And that's when it kind of morphed into a personal project, because then I was thinking, well, I could create a comprehensive body of work on Venice Beach, which I hadn't really seen. I mean, I've seen a lot of people taking great photos of Venice Beach and of life in Venice Beach, but including some of the best, most renowned photographers like Gary Winogrand and others spent a lot of time in Venice. But I couldn't get my hands on a solid book about the culture of Venice Beach. There were some historic things from back, maybe 70s, 80s or earlier, from the skateboard culture. But it was always about one aspect of life in Venice Beach and not something comprehensive. And I couldn't find what I wanted to make, which was that book of life in Venice Beach in general. So that's why I decided, okay, that might be a good personal project for me to do. And I live about 20 minutes away from Venice Beach, so it's also a convenient one to choose because it's right in my backyard.
It's a very unique part of Los Angeles.
Correct. And in a way, I think it's also very, very much the opposite of a lot of aspects of LA. To me, it feels a lot more real. And, you always hear about the Beverly Hills and the Hollywood and kind of the fakeness sometimes of that LA embodies in those areas. The materialism and things like that. And Venice Beach sits at the entire total opposite. And it's world famous for many historic things like, Muscle Beach and surfing and the invention of modern skateboarding and all these things. So anyway, I thought it'd make a meaningful, first personal project that was accessible to me.
How long did it take you to sort of find a groove in terms of photographing there? And let me clarify that, because Venice can be one of the most chaotic places to shoot in.
Correct.
Because there are just so many people, there's so much going on, and it can be kind of difficult to sort of refine your vision, discover sort of the interesting things that really serve your photography, because you can easily just walk around there and not make any pictures just because you don't know where to start.
Right.
When and how were you able to do that?
So I think I started walking around there and kind of taking it all in and trying to make images, but unsuccessfully still for a while before I felt like I might have something. And there's one image in particular, and it's too bad we can't show, maybe you can show it on the blog or something, but one image in particular kind of encouraged me. And it was complete serendipity. It was one of those images that I was lucky to get. And it was a mix of luck and preparation, I would say, because I was trying to put in action some things I had learned from a blog or from a book or something, and some street photography tips that I was trying to put in action. And the right situation presented itself, and I was able to capture it successfully for the first time, and where I felt like I had a really solid kind of portfolio-worthy shot from Venice Beach, and that's what encouraged me to keep trying. And at first, it really required a lot of patience because I was emboldened by this first photo, so I would keep going back there, and it would take me a while to get a second shot of that caliber. It might have taken me 2 or 3 months before I got a second shot that was, another shot worth putting in the portfolio. And then things accelerated a little bit, and I would get good shots on a more regular basis. But yeah, it takes a while, I think, to find one's stride in a particular project or location. And it still happens. The fact that I'm able to do it now in Venice Beach doesn't mean I can do it elsewhere. I know I often go visit relatives in New York City. And New York City obviously is known as a street photographer's dream. And I walk around with my camera and I'm completely stumped, just like I was in Venice Beach early on. So it's not like because I feel like I've got it down in Venice Beach that I can reproduce this success somewhere else just on the fly. I think it's a matter of really feeling the vibe of a place and kind of knowing how to anticipate things that happen there. And then there's several things that helped me, I think, find my groove, like you said, in terms of thinking through different things that could be interesting. So making a shot list is helpful for me, at least mentally, to have in my mind the different things that I'm looking for. Not that I would always capture what's on the shot list. Many times things happen that I've never thought could happen, and I still need to go and try to chase them. But I think having that structure in your mind of possible shots opens the mind to look for more things or to look for the shots that were on that list. So I think it's helpful.
What was that first shot? Can you describe it to us?
Yes. So the first shot was two girls that were about, I don't know, in their maybe early to mid 20s on a bench, and they're very interesting looking with tattoos and interesting haircuts and everything, and they're holding two small dogs. So each one is holding a dog. One is also holding a ice cream cone. The other one is holding her phone. Mm-hmm. When I first approached them, they were just chatting, and I kind of stood. I had a 50 millimeter on, and I wanted like a kind of a close up of them, like in an environmental portrait where I would get the arcades of Venice Beach recognizable in the background, but them really taking most of the frame.
Right.
And so I approached, I was basically standing right in front of them and trying to figure out the angle and everything. And they obviously noticed me and looked at me, and I said, kind of did the international gesture for, is it okay to take a photo? It's just like, I didn't even talk to them. I think I was just kind of showing the camera, and they nodded, which, kind of gave me permission to stick around and take a photo. And I did take a photo, but then I felt like they were too conscious of my presence, and so I just stayed there for longer after taking that first shot, since they had given me permission. And at that point, they just went right back to chatting and kind of forgot about me. And 2 seconds later, they were kissing, and two guys in the background, which I didn't see actually when I took the photo, looked back at them, were looking back at them. And so I was able to get a photo of them kissing with the two dogs and the ice cream and the phone, and then the two guys looking back from the background, which I love it when a photo tells a story, or you can imagine a story from the photo, whether or not that was the reality of what was happening.
Right.
And so in this case, I could imagine the two guys that were ready to make their move and then saw the girls kissing and were kind of disappointing. I mean, they're disappointed. You can imagine all sorts of stories, but to me, it was a very interesting street scene, and that also told a story, and I was able to capture it from close enough with enough intimacy and everything, and it's graphically interesting. And so anyway, I was very proud of myself that day.
So yeah, I'm looking at that picture right now. It's a wonderful, wonderful shot. What did you see in the shot that made you feel like I want to aspire to this? I mean, it's a great moment, but what were the elements that you were seeing that you started sort of hunting for when you went back out there to create more images?
So I wasn't aware of those elements back when I shot this photo, but later on, when I was in a workshop where a photographer named Craig Semetko taught an acronym that stands for, that spells out DINE, which are to him the ingredients to a successful street photograph. This acronym has stuck with me, and what the acronym spells out is DIE, which is easy to remember, obviously, and what it stands for is design for the D, information, the I, and E is emotion. There's lots of acronyms that people make out for these, for what a successful photograph is, and I've heard of 5-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms. Mm-hmm. To me, what resonated with me with this one was it really boiled down to the essence. With the 3 letters, first of all, for me is much easier to remember, and D to me is kind of a given. So really, all I have to keep in mind is the I and the E. Design stands for the composition. Could be the light, could be the layering of the photo and things like that. But to me, that's kind of a given. When you first learn through books or magazines and everything, they teach you about the rule of thirds and all these things. So I think every photographer who's learned a little bit knows that design is important. And I think most people who start making their first successful photographs, design is what they nail first. Because that's really what they're taught first, and what's most obvious when you look at a photo. But to me, what was missing up to then in my photos was probably the element of information and emotion, primarily. And information, what Craig meant with information is that you can tell what's happening, or you can imagine a story in your head from what you see in the photo. And there's enough elements, enough clues in the photos that are obvious and clear that you can do that, that the viewer can do that. And so it means that has to be enough contrasts in the areas where that information is. And it means that the information needs to be big enough and obvious enough. And it's not. Information to me is a hard one, much harder than people would think to capture, because when you're in a scene, when you're experiencing a scene like this in front of you, you have a lot more elements that you can see with your eyes than what you can capture with your camera. You have to fit in that frame a lot of things that you take for granted as a witness to that scene. Mm-hmm. But to capture all those elements, it could be, because you're smelling things, you're hearing things, you can turn your head 360 degrees and see the whole environment. But when you need to capture this with your 50 millimeter, this very constrained 2-dimensional picture, to try to put all this feeling, that what you're experiencing in that little 2-dimensional frame, it's much harder. So the information part is very hard to nail down, to make it obvious to the viewer what the information is that you're transmitting. And then the emotion, to me, is a whole nother level also of complexity, to get the moment where you can either see an emotion in the frame, or you can trigger that emotion in the viewer by what's showing what's in the frame.
Yeah. I mean, you increase your chances of getting the information, the emotion, by photographing at people actively doing something, which is what you see in a lot of the images that on your site for the Venice work. It's not what people typically think of when they think of street photography, which is people walking down the street where they're not really sort of doing anything except moving from point A to point B, but by being at a location where you have a diversity of people actively doing things, you sort of increase your chances of being able to get the I and the E of the die principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really believe that to get those kinds of street photography images, you have to put yourself in those places where there's a lot of action and interaction. You hear a lot, if you go to photojournalism school, you hear a lot about action, interaction. That's what they want in the photos. And that's usually when you get those emotions. It's kind of like if you go fishing, you don't just go randomly in the middle of the ocean. You go in the spots that are known to be good spots for fishing. And I think for street photography, it's the same thing. If you want those emotions and that kind of information in your pictures, you have to go where that information is and that emotion is. And that's where I think Venice Beach is really is a great place for that. And there's spots specifically in Venice Beach that I think are great for the, have a more higher likelihood for these things to happen.
And the great thing about this location, and with a lot of other locations, but especially Venice, is the idea that, people go there to see and be seen. And
right.
So the presence of the camera is a lot less prohibitive than it would be if you're just walking down Wilshire Boulevard in Midtown and approach people to make a photograph. That's
right. And one of the areas, before I focused on Venice Beach, I was photographing all over LA. And one place I didn't think would be hard to photograph or wouldn't be hard for a photographer to be was Beverly Hills. I discovered Beverly Hills is one of the hardest places to shoot because of two things, actually, both of which I didn't expect. One is the whole privacy thing where people are freaked out when you have a camera that you're invading their privacy or the privacy of their children or something, which didn't happen in any other area of LA to me. Even areas like Boyle Heights, where they might have gangs and things like that. I didn't get that. But in Beverly Hills, I did feel that in a big way. And the other thing is that everybody assumes when you have a professional looking camera, or you have two cameras around your neck in Beverly Hills, that you're a paparazzi. So that was the other thing, is people would, the tourists would look at me and say, are you expecting like a celebrity or something? Are you a paparazzi? And so it was very distracting. So those two things made it really hard. I don't like shooting in Beverly Hills. I don't really go back there anymore for those reasons.
Tell me about, because I know that you started submitting your images to the National Geographic website.
Yes.
And that was sort of pivotal for you in terms of you getting your work out there. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's my marketing maybe side, that I've kind of learned through my technology startup experience. I figured if I was going to submit work and try to get my work recognized, I might as well do it with brand names that would add to my CV, and that would be respectable brand names that people would recognize. So National Geographic happens to have this community called Your Shot. And they allow people to submit. I actually mistakenly on that B&H doc, I said 5. I think it's 15 photos per week. And so you can just freely submit your photos. It doesn't cost anything. And each weekday, they review the photos that they received, and they publish 12 of them as what they call the Daily Dozen. And those photos, you can look at them. There's a history of them where you can look at what was selected for the Daily Dozen for the past few years. You can look at each day, and some of the stuff that's there is very, very impressive. But it's all submitted by amateur photographers. And since it's free to submit, you can really increase your chances by submitting often. And you obviously want to be selective because the editors, otherwise I think after a while the editor doesn't really take you seriously. But so you don't want to go and dump your entire hard drive just kind of out of hope that they might select something. But I think if you select your best images and things that fit within what they typically pick, I think people have a good chance to get published. And then you can claim you've been published on National Geographic's website, which they actually call it a publication themselves. So they count how many publications you get. So that was very useful to me initially because I had some things in my portfolio that fit the profile of what they were looking for, and it was free to submit. And I started submitting my photos there, and I very quickly got some things published. So it was very satisfying.
So how do you sort of leverage that? Because when you get opportunities, it's great to have the acknowledgement, but it sometimes means very little if you don't use that as a launching pad to move on to something else. So how did you use it?
So you use it in your social media, and so you can start telling the people who follow you on social media that you were published there. I put it on my website. On my website, I also have. If you go to my website, you'll see that some of the images have in the bottom corner a National Geographic publication logo with where I'm specific about where it was published and what date, and so that's also a way to remind people. Anyone I sent to my website now can see those images with the credibility that backs them from National Geographic. So that's really helpful. The one caveat I want to put on this is I want to say I don't submit photos to YourShot to National Geographic YourShot anymore. One, because I feel like I've gotten enough publications there that I don't really need more to make my case from that standpoint in terms of the publicity and so on. Two is because when you do submit there, it doesn't cost you anything monetarily, but they reserve the rights to publish those photos in any of their publications and for free. So they'll never pay you. They'll never pay me for publications of any of those photos. Even if, say, 20 years from now, they decide to publish one of those photos in the magazine on the cover, which will never happen. But if they did so, I would not get a penny. I decided at this point that, as I build up my portfolio, I would like to be able to keep the rights. Well, it's not that you lose the rights, but I would like to be able to, if the case presented itself, to monetize those photos as opposed to them just using them for free.
As you said before, you weren't getting into this in order to make a living as a photographer, but you certainly wanted to have something to do with your work. You want it to sort of find a home in one way or another. You don't want it just sitting on your hard drive. So how did you start thinking about what this career as a photographer would look like?
It's a good question. I mean, it's very satisfying to start publishing some things and build a portfolio. But at the end of the day, as I was doing this, more and more I decided that street photography was very satisfying just from a, I guess, meditation perspective. For me, it's very meditative to go out to Venice Beach, and sometimes I actually don't even press the shutter. I just walk around and I don't see anything that is, that attracts my attention, but it's just a good time. I also like to contribute. So I decided I wanted to build a portfolio, but I wanted to do it in a way that could also help others. And so it was initially, I was just trying to see if I could make decent images and publish them. That was my first step. And I got that validation pretty quickly with National Geographic and some others. As soon as that was established, I wanted to, I decided because I didn't need the income from this, I needed to find another meaning for what I was doing. And that's when I decided to take on documentary photography and go the photojournalism route and try to help nonprofits or NGOs document what they do and spread the word about good things that they do. So one of the projects I started working on was about people coming out of homelessness in LA. And obviously, we've got this huge homeless problem in LA that's been very, very difficult to resolve. And there's lots of organizations that are working on making strides in getting people out of that homelessness or preventing them from falling into homelessness. And so I'm starting to work with some of those organizations to document what they do. And that's one way that I've found to apply my street photography knowledge and my photojournalism knowledge to make a difference and sort of give back. And I do that work mostly pro bono. Sometimes I get paid a little bit, but it's mostly just to help those organizations. And when I get paid, actually, it's really more so that I think when you get paid, people tend to take you more seriously and don't jerk you around as much. So it's more so, for the efficiency of the work, more so than for the actual. Sometimes I actually get the money and I just give it right back to the organization. It's really in that frame of mind that I'm doing this work.
I see that you attended the Missouri Photographic Workshop.
Correct.
Which is an intense experience for people who are not familiar with it.
Very much so.
Why don't you describe what it is to our listeners, and tell us how you found your story and a little about it.
Sure, absolutely. I actually attended both the Missouri Photo Workshop and the Eddie Adams Workshop back to back, 4 days apart.
Oh my God! And you survived. Kudos.
Yeah. So it was that was quite an experience. I applied to both. These are workshops for people who are not familiar. These are the two top photojournalism workshops probably in the world, and they're extremely intense workshops, and typically you apply and you apply several times before getting in. I got very lucky to be accepted into both on the first try and in the same year. So I didn't plan for this. I thought at best I might be accepted into one, and then I got accepted into both, and I had to kind of figure out, okay, how do I now do both in a row? They're very different workshops, though. They're both very intense. I did the Missouri Photo Workshop first, and the Missouri Photo Workshop is a workshop organized by the University of Missouri, but you don't have to be a student there. You can apply. Anyone can apply, and they get 45 students into a small town of Missouri. So it's a different town of Missouri each time, and their goal is to document rural Missouri over time. I believe they're on that was the 67th workshop, so they've been at this for a long time. It might be the longest running photojournalism workshop in the world. And what it's like is you get into this town and you have to find your story. You spend your first couple of days going around the town. Typically, these are small towns, 3,000 to 5,000 people, and you have to find your story. And once you get your story approved by the faculty, so in the evening you go back and you present your case for the story and what you want to shoot and how you want to shoot it. And your faculty, which is this amazing lineup of faculty, in my case, it was actually about half the faculty was from National Geographic or ex-National Geographic. The other half was from various publications, Washington Post and so on. And they have to accept your story, approve your story, and then you go and shoot it for the rest of the week. And each night you come back, you drop your card. There's this very well-regimented process where you drop your memory card, and you're not allowed to delete anything. So you can't delete any photo that you take, and you're only allowed to shoot 400 photos, 400 frames in that whole week. So between the not being able to delete and the 400 frame limit, you have to be very careful before taking every shot. And it's at first I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna even adjust to this? Because I'm used to really getting those moments by shooting a lot. When I don't shoot a lot in general, but when I see something happening, I really try to overshoot it, so I get the shot at the end, and I couldn't do that there. So it was an interesting way of relearning to shoot. And so anyway, that was an intense week shooting a story in Cuba, Missouri.
And what did you do your story on?
So my story was I actually prepared a little bit before the workshop, and I read up on Cuba, Missouri, which is where we ended up shooting, and kind of researched the town a little bit and the different businesses in the town. And I had found this really interesting barrel factory that I guess is one of the biggest barrel factories in the U.S. And they make barrels for bourbon and also for wine that they ship all over the world. So there's people using their barrels in Spain and France and so on and so forth. So, and they still make them the old-fashioned way. So when I saw that online, I was like, oh, that could be a really interesting place to shoot. And so I actually made contact before arriving in Cuba, Missouri. And so once I got there, I went to see the people and made sure that they were okay with me shooting there, and I explained what I wanted to do the story on, and so it was a little bit easier probably for me than for some other students that just got there and started looking for a story. But they wouldn't let me get away with just that one story idea, so they pushed me to go and look around for other stories. They wanted me to have 2 or 3 other backup stories. So I did spend my first couple of days walking around the town like everybody else, trying to look for stories, and that was an interesting experience, because everywhere, it's a very small town. Everywhere you went, the people that you spoke to already had spoken to 2 or 3 other photographers and said, "Oh no, we're already doing this story with someone else," or "Go see this other person." It was a real hustle. It was really interesting. A lot of pressure.
I did that workshop too, and it's intense, because you get off there and it's like, okay, jump into the pool.
That's
go
right.
find your story, and it's
That's
like
right.
what? I mean, yeah, but it's interesting to be challenged in that way.
Absolutely.
And it also teaches you that there are stories everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those small towns, I mean, you wouldn't... some people got really, really interesting stories. And in hindsight, my story was very visually appealing, with, fire and wood and people putting, barrels together and sawdust. And, so it was very, very cool to shoot, but didn't really have as much heart as some of the other stories that other people found. In hindsight, there were stories with more of a social aspect, or, someone did a story about a Hispanic family in that small town where, it was like 99.5% white, and what their experience was. And so anyway, there were very, very interesting stories that came out of it. It's amazing to see that's part of the appeal to be in that workshop, was not just from my own experience, but to see what others could find and how they would shoot it. And you just learned as much from other people in the workshop as you learned from the faculty. It was an amazing experience.
So how have you found that, this experience getting in depth with photojournalism and your experience in street photography has shaped the way that you see and make images? Well,
I think at the end of the day, whether you're talking about street photography or photojournalism or documentary photography, it's all about storytelling. Those are really, that's what it boils down to. So I think that there's different ways. Either street photography is more, you go, in a, I guess, geographic location and you try to find stories in the street. Photojournalism, you probably have a story in mind and you go to the location where you can shoot that story and work with the people that the story is about. But in the end, you're telling a story. So I think learning photojournalism helps you be better at street photography, and street photography helps you be better at photojournalism, because you have a better you're more graphically oriented or design oriented in your photojournalistic photographs. So I think all these things are complementary and make you a better storyteller at the end of the day.
I see that you were in Cuba and also in Korea. When you go to locations that you're not very familiar with, like you described when you went to initially went to certain locations, you might sort of struggle to get into that groove as opposed to where you were in Venice. But
right.
when you go to a foreign country in a place you've never been before, your synapses are firing almost simultaneously. There's so much stimulus. There's so much that you're seeing. So when you go out to these locations and you're only there for a finite period of time, what are the steps that you take so that you can sort of slow yourself down so that you can actually, make the best images possible?
So I'll talk more about Cuba, because this is really where I organized that trip as a real photo, as a professional travel photography trip. And what I did there is, I'd say probably a couple months before I left, I started studying lots of books that people had shot about Cuba. So thankfully, it's a location that has been shot so much that there's a lot of content out there. So I took those books. That my process was taking in all those books and trying to study what was done by those other photographers, and then making a shot list for myself of situations or aspects of life in Cuba that I wanted in my photographs. So I made a very specific shot list, a few pages long, of all those situations that I had seen in other people's work that I wanted to also be able to shoot. And then I started working with a fixer. So I identified someone on site who was familiar with the place and could find those situations for me and do some location scouting for those situations. So I started working with them several weeks before going, where they would go to locations and give me several options. A barbershop. Okay, I've got like 7 different barbershops, but I would love one where the lighting is such, or that So I would let them do all that prep work without me being there, and then come back with snapshots of, okay, here's what it looks like. Is that okay, or is this okay? So a lot of upfront work that way. I would say once I got there, the shot list and all the prep work was very helpful. But then there was, I left some time also to kind of feel out, well, as you said, you're overwhelmed with everything. But at the same time, I think you have the advantage of not taking anything for granted. So you see lots of things that Cubans don't see anymore. And it only happens for the first few days. I think by the end of even that week, I started to not see some of the things that I had seen on the first day. So I try to take advantage of that. It's almost like a superpower where you're able to see things, pick up on details and decide, okay, this is, to me as a newcomer to this culture, these are really representative of those are things that are really worth capturing. And so trying to hone in on these things that may be obvious to the locals, but to people back home, they'll be very, very interesting. So that's how I approach this trip. And then it's working hard once you're there. I was there for 6 days, and I shot from basically sunrise to after sunset every day with very few breaks. Because I could only stay for a week, so I really wanted to get the most out of it.
And that speaks to an important point. I was actually just wrote about that the other day. This idea of not taking sort of vacation with family where where you get to practice some photography, but taking trips where you exclusively focus on making pictures so that you can spend the entire day making photographs. So how critical that is to the development of any photographer, whether they're doing it for themselves or because they've been hired to do some work.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Cuba trip was actually triggered for me by another family trip that I had taken a few months earlier. I went to Peru with my family, and I was really starting to get really serious with my photography, and I was very frustrated during that trip. And I was also frustrated my family quite a bit by trying to do some professional photography as I was vacationing with my family, and it didn't work for either of us. Mm-hmm. They were angry at me. I was angry at them. It was my photos weren't that good, and it ended up being and I ended up with almost no family photos. So it was a complete disaster, and it made me really want to schedule time in a trip just for photography. So it's exactly when I planned the trip for Cuba, so I could do it just purely for professional photography. And I just did a vacation I just came back for this winter vacation. I took 2 weeks in Bali with my family, and learning from that whole thing, I only took family photos. I did no professional photography whatsoever. I shot everything with my iPhone, and I had a terrific vacation. I have no portfolio shots to bring back, but I had a great time.
That's great. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore on their own. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
Well, my personal hero is Alex Webb, I would say.
Alex, yeah.
That's really the photographer that inspires me the most, and that I've probably learned the most from. Even though I've actually never met him in person, I probably missed him a couple of times when he came to LACP, Los Angeles Center of Photography, to present. I think he came before I started getting really serious with photography, so I didn't know who he was and I didn't attend. But he's a terrific photographer. He's known for for layering. He's like a master layerer. The layers in his photos are just stupendous, and I've learned a lot from him from that standpoint. He shoots mostly color, and I shoot mostly black and white. So it's not exactly when you see his photos, you don't, I guess you wouldn't recognize his style. It's not obvious that I've learned a lot from him, but he's just been a huge inspiration for me. And his book, The Suffering of Light, is probably my number one book in terms of the one that I go back to the most often, and I just study the photos, try to pick up things that I can put into my own photography.
Oh, yeah. His images are images that I will look at, I will take apart and put back together, because there's so much to learn from them.
Absolutely. And I love that he's got several images in each photograph. There's like several, he's like a master at juxtaposing moments. And so you'll have in the same frame, 3 different moments happening at the same time, and, completely separated. And it's just, it's amazing work.
Well, I hope to get him and his wife on this show before the end of the year. So
keep
your fingers crossed.
Absolutely. I'll look forward to that.
Well, Dotan, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a real pleasure for me to be here.
If you're going to be in Los Angeles on the weekend of February 3rd and 4th, come down to the Los Angeles Center of Photography for the culmination of LA Street Week. A week-long dedication to street photography ends with 2 days of presentations by a dozen accomplished street photographers. Photographers will include David Ingraham, Matt Stewart, Rinzi Ruiz, Michelle Grosskopf, John Free, and Julie Dean. I'll also be doing a presentation on Saturday on my own work and approach to street photography. You can find out more by visiting lacp.org or clicking on the link in the show notes. Hope to see you there. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Dotan for joining us on The Candid Frame. You can find out more about Dotan and his work by visiting dotansaguy.com. Thank you for your continued support of The Candid Frame. If you haven't already, please take the time today to write a review in the iTunes Store. Your ratings and comments help people to discover great conversations like the one you heard today. Thanks to Trapani Photo for their 5-star review. You can also support the show by making a regular monthly contribution through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/The Candid Frame, or you'll find a link in the show notes and the Candid Frame website. Or if you just want to make a one-time contribution to the show, you can do so via PayPal by clicking on our donation link on the website. Thanks to all who have recently contributed to the show, including Gary R. Hook, Christopher Cintron, and Meta Image. I can't thank you enough. To access our complete archive of interviews, download the free Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS, Android, and Windows. Links for each can be found in the show notes and the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @IbadianX. Remember to help spread the word. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.